Alright, let's dive into this story. Imagine a busy street in London, right near Buckingham Palace. That's where our story begins. Now meet Fingers Frankie. That wasn't his real name, of course. Frankie wasn't exactly the type to share his real name with anyone, especially not the police. He got the nickname Fingers because, well, he was really good at using them. Too good, some might say. Frankie wasn't a bad guy, not really. He just had really bad luck. And sometimes, bad luck makes people do desperate things. He was small, quick, and usually pretty good at what he did, relieving tourists of their wallets. But lately, business had been slow. Really slow. His pockets were emptier than a politician's promise, and his stomach was rumbling louder than a double-decker bus. He needed a score, and he needed it fast. He scanned the crowd, his eyes darting from face to face. Tourists, mostly. Perfect targets. Lost in their own little worlds, snapping pictures, completely unaware of the dangers lurking nearby. Frankie licked his lips, his heart starting to pound. This could be it. This could be the big one that got him back on his feet. He just had to be careful. This wasn't any ordinary street corner. This was right next to Buckingham Palace, and that meant the Royal Guard. Those guys were serious business. The area around Buckingham Palace was buzzing. Double-decker buses rumbled past, their open tops filled with waving tourists. Street performers played lively tunes, competing with the chatter of 1,000 different languages. Ice cream vendors rang their bells, and the smell of hot dogs filled the air. It was a classic London scene, a postcard come to life. But amidst all the joyful chaos, Frankie saw only opportunity. He knew this area like the back of his hand. He knew which corners had the best shadows, which groups of tourists were the most distracted, and which times of day were the busiest. He also knew where the security cameras were, or at least where most of them were. The sun glinted off the gold gates of the palace, and the air thrummed with a sense of history and importance. But Frankie's eyes were fixed on the people. A family from America, struggling with a map. A group of teenagers taking selfies. And then he saw him. A man in a bright Hawaiian shirt, loaded down with shopping bags and a camera dangling from his neck. Jackpot. He was practically begging to be robbed. Frankie's pulse quickened. This was it. Time to put those fingers to work. He just had to be extra careful. The Royal Guard were always watching. Always. The tourist, completely oblivious, was snapping photos of everything in the palace, the guards, even the pigeons. He was a walking, talking Hawaiian shirt cliché. Frankie could practically smell the money radiating from him. He was the perfect mark. Frankie took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He needed to play this cool. He couldn't look too eager, too obvious. He started to casually stroll in the tourist's direction, weaving through the crowd like a seasoned pro. He bumped into a few people, muttered a quick, sorry, and kept moving. He got closer. He could hear the tourist humming a cheerful tune, probably some cheesy vacation song. Frankie's fingers twitched. The tourist's wallet was sticking out of his back pocket, practically begging to be taken. It was almost too easy. But Frankie knew better than to get cocky. He had to remember where he was. He glanced over at the Royal Guard. They stood like statues, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed straight ahead, or so it seemed. Frankie knew they were watching everything. He just had to be quicker, smoother, more invisible than ever before. This was his chance. He just needed to get a little closer. Okay, Frankie, just act normal, he told himself. Blend in. Be the breeze. Easy to say, harder to do when your heart was hammering like a drum solo and your palms were sweating like you'd just run a marathon. He imagined what he'd do with the money. A hot meal for starters. Maybe a new pair of shoes. He'd been patching his old ones for weeks. And maybe, just maybe, he could finally pay back Mrs. Higgins down the street. She'd been so kind to him when his luck turned sour. Focus, Frankie, focus. He was almost close enough. He could smell the sunscreen on the tourist, a mix of coconut and something vaguely tropical. He could hear the crinkle of the money in the wallet, a siren song calling to him. Just a little closer, he muttered under his breath. He bumped into the tourist, a gentle nudge, almost accidental. Oh, sorry, mate, he mumbled, his eyes darting around to see if anyone had noticed. The tourist just chuckled and waved him off. No worries, happens all the time. Frankie's hand edged closer to the wallet. This was it, the moment of truth. He took another deep breath, and, just a few feet away stood the royal guard. Impeccable, unmoving, like living statues carved from stone and tradition. Their scarlet tunics blazed in the sunlight, and their bearskin hats seemed to add an extra foot to their already imposing height. They held their rifles with unwavering precision, their polished boots gleaming. To anyone else, they might have seemed like mere tourist attractions, living props for vacation photos. But Frankie knew better. He knew the hours of training, the unwavering discipline, the razor-sharp focus hidden behind those impassive faces. He knew they saw everything, even when you thought they weren't looking. He risked another glance. The guard nearest him seemed to be staring straight ahead, lost in some distant thought. But Frankie could feel those eyes, boring into him, watching his every move. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. He reminded himself that these guards were highly trained. They had sharp senses and they had amazing reflexes. This was not going to be an easy crime, no matter how distracted the tourist was. He was risking a lot. He pressed on. Frankie's heart pounded in his chest like a trapped bird. He had to do this. He edged closer, his fingers twitching, ready to spring into action. The tourist was still snapping pictures, completely oblivious to the danger lurking just inches away. Time seemed to slow down. Frankie's hand moved with practiced ease, a blur of motion almost too fast to see. He reached for the wallet, his fingertips brushing against the soft leather. Just a little further. He could almost taste the victory. The money, the relief, the chance to finally get his life back on track. He pictured Mrs. Higgins's smiling face, the warmth of a hot meal, the feel of new shoes on his feet. But then, a shadow fell over him. A cold dread washed over Frankie as he felt a hand clamp down on his wrist like a vice. It wasn't the tourist. It was something far, far worse. He knew, without even looking, what was about to happen. This was not going to end well. The world exploded. One moment, Frankie was reaching for the wallet. The next, he was flying through the air. It all happened so fast, it was like a scene from a movie played on fast forward, then suddenly slowed down to a crawl. He saw the sky, then the pavement rushing up to meet him. He heard a gasp from the crowd, a shout, a distant siren. But mostly, he felt the impact. A jarring, bone-rattling slam that knocked the wind out of him and left him gasping for air. He lay there, dazed and confused, his body aching, his pride shattered. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his shoulder. He was pinned to the ground, unable to escape. Through the haze of pain, he saw the royal guard standing over him, his face still impassive, his uniform still perfect. He hadn't even broken a sweat. The move was so swift, so clean, so utterly efficient. It was almost beautiful. Almost. If it wasn't happening to him. Frankie groaned. He knew he was in deep trouble. He knew this was going to be more than just a slap on the wrist. This was going to be a disaster. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Jaws dropped, eyes widened, and phones were instantly whipped out, ready to capture the spectacle. The cheerful chatter and lively music abruptly ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. Then the murmurs began. "Did you see that? Wow, that was fast. He deserved it." The tourist in the Hawaiian shirt stood there, blinking in confusion, completely unaware of how close he had come to being robbed. He looked around, bewildered by the sudden commotion. Meanwhile, the police arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing. They pushed through the crowd, their faces grim. They quickly assessed the situation, handcuffing Frankie and helping him to his feet, though not very gently. The crowd surged forward, eager to get a closer look. Some people pointed and laughed. Others shook their heads in disapproval. A few even started chanting, "Royal Guard! Royal Guard!" It was a scene of utter chaos and confusion, all thanks to Frankie's ill-fated decision to try his luck near Buckingham Palace. He wished the ground would just open up and swallow him whole. The tourist finally pieced together what had happened. He looked from Frankie, now being hauled away by the police, to the stoic royal guard, and then back again. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he chuckled. "That was exciting. Guess I picked the right spot for my vacation photos." He straightened his Hawaiian shirt, adjusted his camera, and gave the royal guard a hearty thumbs up. The guard, of course, remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. But Frankie could have sworn he saw a flicker of amusement in those unblinking eyes. The police were now leading Frankie towards the patrol car. He stumbled along, his head hanging low, trying to avoid the stares of the crowd. He knew this was going to be all over the news. His career as Fingers Frankie was officially over. As he was being shoved into the back of the car, he caught one last glimpse of the royal guard. The guard stood tall and proud, a symbol of unwavering duty and protection. Frankie sighed. He had messed with the wrong people and now he was paying the price. Big time. But what Frankie didn't know was that a news crew had been filming nearby, capturing footage for a segment on London tourism. And they had caught everything. From Frankie's suspicious approach to the tourist, to the lightning-fast takedown by the royal guard. It was all there in crystal-clear, high-definition glory. The cameraman, initially focused on the picturesque backdrop of Buckingham Palace, had instinctively swiveled his camera towards the commotion. He couldn't believe his luck. This was better than anything they could have scripted. The reporter, equally stunned, quickly regained her composure and began narrating the unfolding drama. As you can see, folks, the royal guard are not just ceremonial figures. They are highly trained protectors of the realm, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The news crew packed up their equipment, buzzing with excitement. They knew they had a viral sensation on their hands. This was going to be the lead story on the evening news, and it was going to be shared around the world. Frankie's humiliation was about to go global. He was so busted, and viral it went. The video spread like wildfire across the internet. Within hours, it had millions of views. People couldn't get enough of the royal guard takedown. It was shared on every social media platform, from TikTok to Twitter, with hilarious captions and witty commentary. Memes exploded. There were images of the royal guard superimposed onto wrestling matches, karate films, and even video games. Frankie's face became a symbol of failure and bad luck. He was the laughingstock of the internet. One popular meme showed Frankie reaching for the wallet, with the caption, "Me reaching for my dreams." The next frame showed him being slammed to the ground, with the caption, "Reality." Another meme featured the royal guard with the caption, "When you're just trying to do your job, but someone messes with your personal space." Frankie couldn't escape it. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. They pointed, they whispered, they laughed. He tried to hide, but it was no use. He was a viral sensation, and not in a good way. He had become a walking, talking meme. The news channels, eager to capitalize on the viral sensation, started running segments about the royal guard. They interviewed historians, security experts, and even former royal guards, all of whom praised the training and dedication of these iconic figures. "The royal guard are not just there for show," explained one expert. "They undergo rigorous training in combat, surveillance, and crowd control. They are highly skilled professionals who are always alert and ready to protect the royal family and the public." The expert went on to explain that the guards' seemingly unblinking eyes were actually a key part of their surveillance technique. They were trained to scan their surroundings constantly, looking for any signs of danger. And their rigid posture wasn't just for show either. It allowed them to react quickly and efficiently to any threat. That takedown was a perfect example of their training in action, the expert concluded. It was swift, decisive, and effective. The thief never stood a chance. The news coverage only further cemented the royal guard's image as symbols of strength, vigilance, and unwavering dedication. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Frankie was having a miserable time. He was being questioned, fingerprinted, and generally treated like the lowlife he was. He tried to explain his situation, how he was down on his luck, how he just needed a little money to get back on his feet. But the police weren't buying it. "Pickpocketing is a crime, Frankie," the officer said sternly. "And trying to do it in front of the royal guard? That's just plain stupid." Frankie sighed. He knew he had messed up. Big time. He thought about his life, about the choices he had made that had led him to this point. He hadn't always been a thief. He used to have a regular job, a nice apartment, a decent life. But then, things had started to go wrong. He lost his job, he got into debt, and he started making bad decisions. He thought about Mrs. Higgins, the kind old woman who lived down the street. She had always been there for him, offering him a warm meal and a friendly ear. He felt a pang of guilt. He had let her down. He had let himself down. Maybe, just maybe, this was a wake-up call. Maybe it was time to turn his life around. The next morning, the tourist in the Hawaiian shirt, whose name was apparently Bob Johnson from Iowa, went to the police station. He had seen the news reports about the incident and felt a twinge of sympathy for the hapless thief. "I'd like to drop the charges," Bob said to the officer. "That young man made a mistake. I don't want to ruin his life." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure, Mr. Johnson? He did try to steal your wallet." I know, Bob replied. "But I'm sure he's learned his lesson. Besides, I'm on vacation. I don't want to spend my time in court." The officer sighed. He had seen it all before. "All right, Mr. Johnson. I'll see what I can do." And so, thanks to the unexpected kindness of a tourist from Iowa, Frankie got a break. The charges were dropped, and he was released with a stern warning. He was free to go, but he knew his reputation was ruined. He would have to find a new way to make a living. And this time, he vowed to do it honestly. Walking out of the police station, Frankie felt lost and ashamed. He had no money, no job, and no friends. He was a pariah, a laughingstock, a failure. He wandered the streets aimlessly, trying to avoid the stares of passers-by. He ended up back near Buckingham Palace, drawn to the scene of his humiliation. He stood there, watching the royal guard, their faces still impassive, their uniforms still perfect. He felt a strange mix of resentment and respect. He knew he couldn't go back to his old life. He had to find a new path, a new purpose. But what could he do? He was a thief, a pickpocket, a criminal. What other skills did he have? As he stood there, lost in thought, he noticed something. A young boy had dropped his ice cream cone, and it was melting all over the pavement. The boy was crying, his face covered in sticky goo. Without thinking, Frankie rushed over to the boy and offered him his handkerchief. "Here, son," he said gently. "Wipe your face." The boy looked up at him, surprised. He took the handkerchief and wiped away the tears and ice cream. "Thank you," he said softly. In that moment, Frankie felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could still be a good person. Maybe he could still make a difference in the world. The Royal Guard incident became a major boost for tourism in London. People flocked to Buckingham Palace, eager to see the famous guards in action and maybe even catch a glimpse of the spot where Fingers Frankie had met his downfall. Souvenir shops started selling t-shirts with slogans like, "I got tackled by the Royal Guard," and "Don't mess with the Queen's men." The video of the takedown played on a loop in every shop window, attracting even more curious onlookers. The royal family even released a statement, thanking the Royal Guard for their unwavering service and dedication. They didn't mention Frankie by name, of course, but everyone knew who they were talking about. The incident also led to increased security measures around Buckingham Palace. More cameras were installed, and more police officers were deployed. The message was clear. London was a safe city, and the Royal Guard were there to protect it. It was a win-win situation for everyone, except for Frankie. Finding a legitimate job proved to be more difficult than Frankie had anticipated. His face was too well known. Every time he went for an interview, the interviewer would recognize him and either laugh or politely decline. He tried working as a dishwasher, but he kept dropping the plates. He tried being a street sweeper, but he was too short to reach the higher bins. He even tried busking, playing the harmonica for spare change, but nobody stopped to listen. They just pointed and whispered, "That's the Royal Guard guy." He was constantly reminded of his failure. The video followed him everywhere, haunting him like a ghost. He couldn't even watch television without seeing himself being slammed to the ground. One day, he was walking down the street when he saw a group of kids playing. They were reenacting the Royal Guard takedown, using each other as props. Frankie stopped and watched them, a bitter smile on his face. He was a legend, all right. A legend in his own lunchtime. One rainy afternoon, while desperately searching for spare change in his pockets, Frankie saw Bob Johnson, the tourist from Iowa, struggling with several large shopping bags. They were overflowing with souvenirs and looked incredibly heavy. Frankie hesitated. Should he help him? It was the right thing to do, but it was also incredibly awkward. What would Bob say? Would he recognize him? Would he call the police? But then he remembered the kindness Bob had shown him by dropping the charges. He owed him. He took a deep breath and walked over to the tourist. "Excuse me, sir," Frankie said nervously. "Do you need some help with those bags?" Bob looked up, surprised. He squinted at Frankie for a moment. Then his eyes widened in recognition. "Wait a minute," he said. "Aren't you?" Frankie braced himself for the worst. "Yeah," he mumbled. "I am. Look, I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, and I'm really sorry about trying to steal your wallet." Bob chuckled. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Small world, isn't it? And thank you for apologizing. And yes, I could definitely use some help. These British souvenirs are heavier than they look." Frankie helped Bob carry the bags back to his hotel. They chatted awkwardly along the way, Bob asking about Frankie's life and Frankie trying to avoid eye contact. He explained that he was trying to find a new job, something honest. When they reached the hotel, Bob turned to Frankie with a smile. "You know," he said, "I own a security company back in Iowa. We're always looking for good people. Maybe you should give me a call when you're ready for a fresh start." Frankie was stunned. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Absolutely," Bob replied. "You've got quick hands, you're good at spotting trouble, and you've clearly learned your lesson. I think you could be a real asset to my company." Frankie couldn't believe his luck. It was like something out of a movie. He thanked Bob profusely and promised to call him as soon as he got his life back on track. As Bob walked into the hotel, Frankie felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally escape his past. Maybe he could finally become the person he was meant to be. A few months later, Frankie found himself in Iowa, working for Bob's security company. He was surprised at how much he enjoyed it. His quick hands and sharp eyes, once used for stealing, were now used for protecting people and property. He was a natural. He could spot a suspicious character from a mile away. He knew all the tricks of the trade because he had used them himself. He was the best security guard Bob had ever hired. He even started teaching self-defense classes to the other employees, incorporating some of the moves he had learned on the streets of London. He never mentioned the Royal Guard incident, of course. That was a chapter of his life he preferred to forget. He was finally happy. He had a good job, a new home, and a fresh start. He had left his past behind and become a new person. He was no longer Fingers Frankie, the thief. He was Frankie, the security guard, and he was proud of it. Years later, Frankie returned to London for a visit. He wanted to see Buckingham Palace again, to face his demons and put the past behind him once and for all. He stood across the street watching the Royal Guard. They were still there, still stoic, still unwavering in their duty. He felt a pang of respect for them, for their dedication and their discipline. He smiled to himself. He had come a long way since that fateful day. He was no longer a thief, no longer a laughingstock. He was a respected security guard, a valued member of his community. He took a deep breath and turned to walk away. As he did, he noticed a young man acting suspiciously, eyeing the tourists with a predatory gaze. Frankie's instincts kicked in. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror for too long. He approached the young man and gently steered him away from the crowd. "Hey, mate," he said. "You might want to try a different line of work. Trust me, this one doesn't pay." The young man looked at him, confused, then shrugged and walked away. Frankie watched him go, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had finally found his purpose. He was a protector, a guardian, a force for good. And it all started with a Royal Guard takedown. He smiled, knowing his life had truly turned around.